Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into a topic that really makes you rethink how we see autism.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking high masking autism today,
Yeah.
and specifically this article that just completely dismantles this myth that if you're good at blending in, you're not really autistic.
Yeah. It's a myth that really, I think, highlights how much we still misunderstand about the autism spectrum. It's not a one-size-fits-all experience. Autism is so diverse, and what's happening beneath the surface can be completely different from a person's outward appearance.
Okay, so for anyone who's maybe new to this, let's define high masking. So we're talking about autistic individuals who become incredibly adept at navigating social situations in a way that often masks their autistic traits. But here's the thing, and the article really drives this home, it comes at a cost.
hmm Yeah, that's where the danger of this myth lies, right?
Oh,
We dismiss the very real struggles of high-masking individuals. It's like assuming someone isn't in pain just because they're not outwardly showing it. The article actually uses this phrase, it compares it to living a double life, which really struck me.
wow. That's a powerful image. And, it makes me wonder about the emotional toll. Like, what are we talking about here
hmm
specifically?
Well, imagine the exhaustion of constantly monitoring and adjusting your behavior to meet social expectations. It can be incredibly draining, leading to burnout, anxiety, and a constant sense of not belonging.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about this. If someone is masking that effectively, shouldn't we just be impressed by their social skills rather than assuming they're not struggling?
Yeah,
Like, where does this need to debunk their experience come from?
that's a great question. I think it speaks to a larger societal discomfort with anything that deviates from what we perceive as normal.
Mm.
It's easier to dismiss someone's experience than to grapple with the complexity of neurodiversity.
Neurodiversity, meaning essentially that variations in our brains are natural, not something to be fixed. And I think this is where empathy becomes absolute crucial.
100%. We have to move beyond judging based solely on outward behavior and recognize that internal reality can be vastly different. It's about leading with curiosity rather than assumptions.
You know, the article uses this phrase that I can't shake, and it's invisible struggles. And it made me wonder, how can understanding these invisible struggles, especially when it comes to high masking autism, make us all more empathetic human beings? And not just towards those on the spectrum.
Right. Yeah, recognizing those invisible struggles, I think it really gets to the heart of what it means to practice empathy. It's about understanding that we all experience the world in different ways, and those differences are something to be, understood, not judged.
Absolutely. It's about widening our lens, right? Because
Yeah.
like you were saying earlier, autism isn't a monolith. The article talks about how we can't generalize the experiences of autistic people, even when it comes to something like masking.
Right. And that's a really important point. There's no single right way to experience autism. Some people might mask very consciously as a strategic way to navigate certain situations, while others do it more unconsciously, almost like a reflex.
It's like code switching, but on a whole other level,
Yeah.
right? And thinking about it that way, it makes sense that it takes such a toll, especially when you consider the neurological aspect.
Yeah, that's a great parallel. Code switching is definitely a helpful way, I think, to understand the social adaptation that's involved in masking. But you're right, there's a deeper layer here. So for neurotypical individuals, code switching might be about fitting in, but for autistic people, masking can be about navigating a world that feels overstimulating,
Mm.
overwhelming, literally wired differently. It's not just social, it's neurological.
That makes so much sense. And the article actually touches on that, like the sensory overload, the social exhaustion, all these things factor into why masking, while maybe helpful in the moment, can have these really difficult long-term consequences.
And those consequences are often invisible to the outside observer. It's that feeling of constantly being on, which can lead to, intense feelings of isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, because even if you're surrounded by people, if you're not able to truly be yourself, that connection is superficial at best, right?
Mhm.
And worse, it can make seeking genuine support even harder.
Exactly. Imagine feeling like you have to choose between being your authentic self and navigating the world around you. It's a heartbreaking choice, and one that many autistic people feel forced to make every single day. And it's this kind of pressure that can make it so difficult to reach out for support for fear of judgment or not being autistic enough.
Right, which just perpetuates this harmful cycle of silence and isolation. Reading this has really been a wake-up call for me. I think for a lot of us, myself included, we tend to think of autism in a very fixed way.
Yeah, and that's precisely why we need to shift, I think, from awareness to understanding. It's about recognizing the full spectrum of experiences within the autistic community. This article is focused on high masking. But it's crucial to remember that even that exists on a spectrum.
Meaning someone might mask heavily in some scenarios like at work or in large social settings, but be much less likely to mask at home or with close friends.
Exactly. It's about adapting to different environments and social demands, which can shift and change depending on the context.
Yeah, it really highlights the fluidity of the human experience, doesn't it? And it
Right.
makes you realize how many assumptions we make based on these like limited snapshots we have of people's lives.
It's so true. We tend to categorize and label based on what we see on the surface. And in doing so, we miss out on the richness and complexity of the individual.
Absolutely. And that brings us to, I think, the core question here. How do we move beyond just understanding high masking to actually creating a more accepting and inclusive environment for neurodivergent individuals? Because it's one thing to have this knowledge, but how do we put it into action?
Right. Well, I think it starts with challenging our own biases and assumptions.
Yeah.
It's about questioning those ingrained beliefs we have about what's normal and recognizing that those beliefs can be incredibly limiting, not just for neurodivergent individuals, but for all of us.
So it's about being willing to sit with a little discomfort, to question those knee-jerk reactions we might have when someone doesn't fit neatly into our preconceived notions of how people should act or behave.
Exactly. And it's about being open to learning from those who experience the world differently than we do. The article talks about the importance of centering lived experience, of actually listening to and believing autistic voices.
And not just listening passively, but actively seeking out those voices, right? Because I think sometimes it's easy to fall into this trap of, well, I don't personally know anyone who's autistic, or I haven't had any direct experience with this, so.
Right. Which is why it's on each of us to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
And that could be as simple as, seeking out books, articles, podcasts like this one, hopefully. But beyond that, it's about having those conversations with friends, family, colleagues. The more we normalize talking about neurodiversity, the less power those outdated stereotypes hold.
Yeah, it's about creating that ripple effect of understanding. Because even if we feel like our individual actions are small, they contribute to a larger shift in perspective.
100%. And, alongside those individual actions, we also need to push for systemic change. That means advocating for more inclusive hiring practices, better access to support services and educational systems that celebrate neurodiversity, rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold.
Right, because ultimately it's about creating a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they are, not for who society tells them they should be.
Beautifully said. And when we create that kind of world, it doesn't just benefit those who are neurodivergent. It benefits everyone.
Mhm.
It opens up our understanding of what's possible, of what it means to be human.
I love that. Okay, as we wrap up this incredible deep dive, is there one final thought-provoking nugget you can leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that we all have a role to play in creating a more inclusive and equitable world. It starts with challenging our own biases, with listening with open hearts and minds, and with taking action in our own lives and in the systems around us.
Such powerful advice. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly insightful and important conversation.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to geek out about neurodiversity.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Remember, the world needs your unique perspective and your willingness to embrace difference. Until next time, keep asking those big questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.